What happens when a Hollywood legend walks into the view expecting a warm, thoughtful conversation, and instead finds herself cornered by a question that cuts so deep it stops the entire studio cold? The lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and the audience buzzed with that unmistakable anticipation that comes when a true icon steps onto the stage. Halle Berry, graceful, poised, wrapped in a charcoal suit that shimmered softly under the studio lights, walked out smiling. It was the warm, open smile the world had known for decades. One that carried resilience, beauty, and the unmistakable weight of someone who had survived Hollywood's sharpest edges and still stood luminous. The applause rose like a wave, filling the studio. People were excited. This was Halle Berry, an Oscar winner, a barrier breaker, a figure whose presence commanded respect without her ever needing to ask for it. Joy Behar leaned forward in her seat, that familiar mischievous glint in her eyes. On most days, it meant a joke was coming. Today, it meant something else, something sharper. Sunny Hostin greeted Halle with genuine warmth. Sarah Haynes offered that gentle, welcoming smile she always carried. Whoopi nodded, the calm center of the show, though even she seemed curious about what this conversation might turn into. But Joy sat back in her chair, hands folded, eyes fixed, like she was waiting for the right moment to pounce. The interview began smoothly. Halle talked about her new film, her evolving roles, her journey into producing stories with deeper emotional weight. She spoke quietly but confidently, her voice like velvet lined with steel. The audience was hanging on every word. Until Joy cut in. "So Halle," Joy said, her tone light but edged, "you've talked for years about empowerment and independence, but some people online think you've contradicted yourself recently. Are you really practicing what you preach?" A visible ripple went through the audience. Confusion, surprise, a collective inhale. It wasn't the question itself. It was the bite in the way it landed. A challenge. A provocation. One that didn't feel rooted in curiosity but accusation. Halle's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. Not dramatically. Not with irritation. More like she was taken aback, like the air had shifted in a way she didn't expect. "I'm not sure I follow," Halle replied slowly, choosing her words with measured care. "Can you clarify what you mean?" Joy didn't blink. "Well, there's this whole conversation online," she continued, waving her hand as though the details were trivial, "that some of your personal choices don't exactly line up with the message of independence you put out there. People are saying it looks a little hypocritical." Sunny's face tightened, just a little. Saya shifted in her seat. Even Whoopi straightened, her eyes narrowing toward Joy as though a silent warning hovered between them. Careful. But it was too late. Joy had already pushed the match to the fuse. Halle inhaled through her nose, her posture still perfect, but there was something different in her eyes now, something cool, alert, assessing. Like someone who had survived countless interrogations and learned exactly when a question was coming from a place of truth, and when it wasn't. "Well," Halle said, her voice steady but no longer warm, "if people think they know me based on a few headlines or half-formed narratives online, that's their choice. But I don't live my life by the court of public opinion." Joy leaned in. "Oh, come on, Halle. That sounds like a convenient answer. You're a public figure. You know you're setting an example. Don't you think people have a point?" A soft murmur spread through the audience, the kind of sound that happens when a room full of people collectively ask, "Is this really happening?" Sunny jumped in, trying to diffuse. "I think what Joy is trying to say." But Joy interrupted sharply. "No, I said what I meant." Whoopi exhaled a long, slow breath. The kind she released before stepping in to prevent a train wreck, or watch one happen. Halle's eyes locked onto Joy's. Calm. Steady. But beneath that calm was something else, something fiery. "Joy," Halle said quietly, "I've worked for over 30 years to build my voice. To tell women to stand strong. To survive. To choose themselves even when the world tells them not to. That message hasn't changed. Not once. And it certainly doesn't hinge on what strangers online think they understand about my life." Joy folded her arms. "But don't you think they are just responding to the image you've created?" Halle tilted her head, her voice dropping to a near whisper, the kind that somehow carried more power than raising it. "The only image I've created, Joy, is the one I fought to earn. The one I bled for. And if people want to twist that into something else, that's not my hypocrisy. That's their projection." The audience reacted. Low whistles, a few claps, murmurs growing louder. Sarah blinked, stunned. Sunny's eyes widened. Whoopi's mouth curved into that subtle smile she wore when someone delivered a well-placed verbal strike. Joy, however, didn't smile. Her jaw tightened. Oh, so now it's projection. It usually is, Halle replied, unwavering. The tension in the room thickened. Cameras zoomed in instinctively, catching the fire building behind Halle's poised expression. She hadn't raised her voice, but the temperature in the studio had undeniably changed. And then Joy said the line that detonated everything. Well, maybe if you were a little more transparent instead of acting like you're above criticism, people wouldn't have to guess. A sharp gasp cut through the audience. Halle froze. Not in shock, not in fear, but in the kind of rare, chilling stillness that comes right before someone decides they are done being pushed around. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, controlled, but every syllable carried weight. Joy, I don't think you understand the difference between transparency and explanation. I don't owe explanations about my personal life to you, or to anyone watching. Empowerment isn't about giving the world access. It's about choosing your boundaries and standing by them. Joy opened her mouth to push again, but Halle didn't let her. And if you think that makes me above criticism, then maybe the problem isn't my message. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharpening. Maybe it's the way you're choosing to hear it. The audience erupted, clapping, gasping, leaning forward as though witnessing the first crackle of lightning before a storm fully hits. Joy blinked. It was the first moment she seemed genuinely thrown. Halle didn't look away. The studio had gone electric. Everyone knew this conversation had crossed a line, and the real confrontation was only just beginning. The silence that followed didn't feel like silence at all. It pulsed. It vibrated through the studio like a wire pulled too tight. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, adjusting with faint mechanical whirs as they tried to anticipate where the next spark would fly. Joy Behar shifted in her seat, forcing a laugh that came out thinner than she intended. It wasn't her usual confident, teasing laugh. It was the kind used to brush dust off a moment that felt heavier than expected. Well, Joy murmured, spreading her hands as if to reset the tone. That's one way to look at it. But Halle Berry didn't soften. Her eyes remained locked on Joy, her expression calm, almost too calm. Like she had stepped into a place of absolute clarity. A place she rarely visited unless someone pushed her past the line. Whoopi, who had been watching the exchange like a storm chaser judging the shape of a forming funnel cloud, finally stepped in with a slow, deliberate breath. All right, she said, her voice a low rumble. Let's take a second. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. Her pride stung, her authority on the show shaken. She leaned forward again, reclaiming her stance like someone determined not to lose ground. I'm just saying, Joy continued, her voice rising a little. If you're presenting yourself as a role model, people expect honesty. You can't blame them for reacting when things don't add up. Halle blinked once. Slowly. A gesture that wasn't dismissal, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had spent years being misinterpreted, reduced, dissected by people who believed they knew her story better than she did. Joy, Halle said softly, I've been honest my entire life. What I haven't been is public about every detail. There's a difference. Joy scoffed, not cruelly, but defensively. Well, that's convenient. Sunny stepped in, her tone gentle but firm. Joy, come on. That's not fair. People. No, Sunny. Joy cut her off sharply. I'm trying to have a real conversation here. Halle tilted her head, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Joy, this isn't a conversation. You're not asking me anything. You're accusing me. A ripple of sound moved through the audience, that collective O that signaled they felt the heat rising again. Joy's voice became clipped, sharper than before. No one is accusing you, Halle. You're just being sensitive about. The moment the word sensitive left Joy's mouth, Halle's expression changed. Just a flicker, but enough for the entire room to go still. Sensitive. Halle repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. You think I'm sensitive because I'm asking you to respect my boundaries. Joy let out a breath and waved her hand dismissively. I'm saying you're being defensive. You're acting like a question is an attack. The laugh that slipped from Halle's mouth was quiet, humorless, wounded. Not because she was hurt, but because she recognized something she had lived through far too many times. I've spent a lifetime being questioned, Halle said. Interrogated. Judged for choices no one else had to justify. I'm not defensive, Joy. I'm done being dissected. Sarah Haynes nodded in agreement, leaning forward. It does feel like this is getting a little personal, she said carefully. Maybe we should reset. Why? Joy snapped, the frustration bubbling over. Why does everyone act like Halle can't handle a tough question? She's an adult. She's a public figure. She's not fragile. Halle's jaw tightened. Stop calling my boundaries fragility, she said. The audience gasped again, louder this time, sharper, filled with an almost electric sympathy. Joy froze, because that line didn't just land, it cut right through the center of the room. Halle continued, her voice steady, unwavering. You don't get to decide what I should tolerate. You don't get to define what strength looks like for me. And you don't get to label me sensitive because I won't let you poke at parts of my life that are not yours to unravel. Joy's lips tightened, and for a moment, something in her eyes shifted, not anger, but something closer to embarrassment, though she masked it quickly. Whoopi leaned forward, hands clasped together. All right, Joy. All right, Halle. Let's pause before this becomes something none of us intended. But the moment Whoopi said it, the audience felt it. This had already become something nobody intended. Joy took a slow breath, adjusting her posture, as though steadying herself for another round. Look, she said, her voice lower. I'm doing my job. I'm asking what people are talking about. I'm not trying to attack you. Halle nodded gently. Then ask with curiosity, not judgment. Joy didn't respond. Not immediately. And in that silence, the tension stretched like a held breath. Sire, her voice barely above a whisper, finally said, maybe we should move on to the film? I think we've gotten a little off track. But before Whoopi could redirect, Joy let out a quick breath, the kind signaling she wasn't done. It's just surprising, Joy said. Someone who talks so much about empowerment getting upset over criticism. Halle's eyes snapped to hers. The warmth was gone. The softness gone. What remained was raw honesty, the kind that can only come from a person who refuses to let another human write their story for them. Joy, Halle said, her voice dropping low enough that the microphones pulled close to catch the words. Empowerment doesn't mean letting people demean you. It means knowing when to speak up and when to walk away. That final phrase, walk away, cut through the air like a warning. The audience gasped yet again, some shifting to the edges of their seats, sensing something monumental approaching. A few phones in the crowd lifted discreetly, capturing the moment even as producers gestured frantically for people not to record. Joy raised her brows. Walk away. From a question. Halle didn't move. Walk away, she repeated, from a conversation that no longer comes from a place of respect. And Joy pushed back with the one line that sent everything spiraling. Well, if you're so determined to control how people see you, maybe you shouldn't come on shows where people ask real questions. Even Whoopi's eyes widened at that. The energy in the room flipped. Suddenly, it wasn't tension anymore. It was disbelief. Shock. A feeling that the ground beneath this interview had cracked completely. Halle inhaled slowly, her right hand closing into a gentle fist on her knee. The confrontation had reached a point of no return. And the next moment, the one hanging in the air like thunder waiting to clap, would change the remainder of the interview. It was the moment Halle Berry decided whether to stay in her seat or stand her ground louder than anyone expected. The air in the studio felt tight, like the temperature had climbed even though no one had moved. The audience's murmurs quieted into a charged stillness, the kind that comes right before something breaks. Halle Berry didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply stared at Joy Behar with the kind of focus that made the room feel smaller, quieter, more intimate. Like the world outside had vanished and only this moment, this collision, existed. Joy, Halle said slowly, I came on this show because I respect conversations that challenge, not conversations that tear down. Joy crossed her arms. Nobody's tearing you down. You're just overthinking it. That was the moment Halle shifted forward in her seat, a small movement, but deliberate, unmistakable. The audience leaned with her, instinctively sensing gravity pulling toward her side of the stage. No, Halle said, her voice soft but infused with unmistakable force. I'm hearing you clearly. Maybe more clearly than you intended. Sunny swallowed hard, gently raising a hand as if she could slow the unraveling. Halle, Joy, maybe we should. But Joy's breathing had changed, quickened slightly, her shoulders tense, her tone edging more defensive than assertive now. I think you're reading too much into a simple question, Joy insisted. I'm trying to talk about the public conversation. That's all. Halle let out a slow exhale, the kind that came from years of dealing with the same pattern. Being misunderstood, then blamed for noticing the misunderstanding. It's never just the question, Halle said. It's the intent behind the question. And the way you keep twisting my answers tells me everything I need to know about the intent. A collective gasp fluttered through the audience. Joy's mouth opened slightly, her expression caught between indignation and disbelief. Twisting your answers. Oh, okay. So I'm the villain here. Halle didn't hesitate. No, but you're acting like someone who's not interested in listening. Only provoking. Joy threw her hands up, her voice rising. I'm sorry you feel attacked. Halle cut her off immediately. Don't say that. The interruption hit with the crispness of a snapped twig. Quick. Precise. Final. Joy blinked. Say what? I'm sorry you feel attacked, Halle repeated. It's dismissive. It shifts responsibility away from your words and onto my feelings. We're both grown women. If you mean something, own it. Don't hide behind indirect apologies. The audience reacted again, louder than before. Some clapped. Some gasped. Others whispered to whoever sat beside them, their faces lit with the thrill of witnessing a moment that spiraled beyond the point of no return. Joy clenched her jaw, searching for footing she could regain, something she could say to pull herself back into control. Halle, I'm doing my job, she said, her voice hardened now. And if you don't like the questions... It's not about liking the questions, Halle said. Her tone stayed even, but her eyes pulsed with intensity. It's about fairness. It's about respect. You don't have to agree with me, Joy. But you do have to talk to me like a human being, not a headline. Joy scoffed. Oh please. No one's treating you like a headline. Halle leaned back slightly, her chin lifting, and the steel in her voice returned. Joy, I've lived an entire career being reduced to headlines. My relationships, my choices, my mistakes. All of it. And I came here for a conversation, not an interrogation based on tabloid noise. Sunny looked helplessly between them. We should really. But now it wasn't just Halle and Joy locked in the moment. Whoopi finally stepped in, sitting forward with purpose. Her voice was low, measured, and carried the weight of someone who had navigated conflict in front of cameras longer than almost anyone in the room. Joy. Halle. We can pull this back together, Whoopi said. But we have to shift the tone. Because right now, it's going in a direction that's not good for anybody. Halle broke her gaze with Joy for the first time, looking at Whoopi with something almost like relief, but guarded, as if she wasn't entirely sure the moment could be salvaged. Joy, however, looked anything but ready to shift. I just think, Joy said sharply, that if people question you, you shouldn't get angry. You should just address it. Halle's eyes returned to her, steady and unwavering. And I think if you're going to question someone, you should do it without assuming the worst. Joy pressed her lips together as the studio grew so quiet you could hear someone coughing softly in the back row. Halle didn't stop. You say you're asking what people are talking about, Halle continued. But the way you ask, it feels like you've already decided what story you want me to fit into. Joy inhaled sharply. That's not true. Then why won't you hear what I'm saying? Halle asked. Joy opened her mouth, but no words came out. And that silence, that hesitation, gave Halle an opening she hadn't taken before. Halle spoke softly, almost painfully so. Do you know what it feels like to have to justify your strength? To explain your survival? To have people tell you your boundaries make you sensitive, or your silence means guilt? I've lived through things most people don't know about. I've fought through things I never publicized. And I'm still standing. The audience softened, their expressions shifting, empathy rising. Joy watched Halle, but something in her gaze flickered again, like she was trying to understand but still struggling to let go of her defensive posture. Halle's voice deepened, carrying emotion that cracked gently through her calmness. I fought to be strong in a world that wanted me to break. So when I sit here and tell you that your question feels unfair, that your tone feels disrespectful, I'm not being fragile. I'm honoring the boundaries that kept me alive. A hush fell over the room. Even Joy didn't have a retort ready. Halle leaned forward slightly, her eyes softening but still unwavering. And if you can't understand that, Joy, then maybe you're not asking the question for clarity. Maybe you're asking it for the reaction. Joy swallowed. Hard. And for the first time, she looked unsure. It lasted only a second, a small flicker of vulnerability, but it was there. Whoopi glanced toward the audience, then the camera, then back to Halle and Joy, her instinct for show pacing kicking in. All right, Whoopi said gently. Before we get too far off the rails, let's reset. Halle, we want to hear about the film. We want to hear about your story. But Halle only half heard her, because Joy was staring back at her with a look that had shifted again. Frustration, yes, but mixed with something else. Challenge. Pride. And maybe even a hint of bruised ego. And in that moment, everyone in the studio felt it. This was not over. Not even close. The next words, whichever woman spoke them, would decide whether this interview returned to stable ground, or lit the match that would turn the entire segment into a moment destined to go viral for all the wrong reasons. The pause that filled the studio wasn't empty. It throbbed with tension. The audience sat frozen, the host stiff, the producers behind the cameras gesturing frantically while whispers moved like wind through tall grass. Joy Behar wasn't ready to back down. Not after everything that had been said. Not after the look Halle had given her, a look that sliced straight through bravado and struck the vulnerable ego beneath. Halle wasn't moving either. She sat poised, legs crossed, hands resting calmly on her knee, but there was a storm behind her stillness. A storm she had spent her whole life learning to control. Whoopi glanced between them and exhaled sharply. She could feel the thread holding the segment together wearing down to a single, fraying fiber. Halle, Whoopi began gently, we really do want to talk about the new movie. Why don't you? But Joy cut in. No, Joy said flatly. I want to finish this. A collective gasp shot through the room. One big inhale, a choking sound of disbelief. Sunny covered her mouth. Sarah shook her head subtly, eyes wide. Even Whoopi froze. Halle slowly turned her head toward Joy. Her expression didn't shift. It didn't have to. Her silence alone carried the weight of a coming eruption. Joy leaned forward. If you think everything I'm asking is disrespectful, she said, her voice stiff, then tell me what wouldn't be disrespectful. Because from where I sit, you're acting like the victim in a conversation that's supposed to be honest. Halle swallowed, her jaw tightening. Then she spoke, her tone like air passing over ice. You want honesty? Fine. The audience leaned in so tightly the studio felt as if it had shrunk to half its size. You say you're doing your job, Halle continued. But your job isn't to corner people. It isn't to poke and poke until somebody breaks on live TV for entertainment. Your job is to have a conversation. A real one. Joy's eyes narrowed. Don't tell me what my job is. I'm telling you what this felt like, Halle said. Not a conversation. Not a dialogue. A performance. You wanted a reaction, and now that you have one, you're acting like I'm the problem. Joy's voice snapped like a rubber band stretched too tight. Maybe you are the problem. The studio erupted, gasps, murmurs, even a shouted whoa from someone in the audience. Whoopi immediately raised a hand. Joy. Halle's eyes glistened, not with tears but with something deeper. Fearless vulnerability. Righteous anger. A lifetime of being misread, misunderstood, misjudged. Do you hear yourself? Halle asked softly. You don't even hear me. You're not talking to me. You're talking at me. And you're proving exactly what I've been saying. You're not here to understand. You're here to win. Joy recoiled slightly, her face flushing. I don't need to win anything. I'm just calling out the hypocrisy. Sunny finally snapped. Joy, that's enough, she said, her voice sharper than anyone had ever heard it. This isn't fair. This isn't balanced. You're not giving Halle a chance. This has gone too far. Sarah nodded quickly. Seriously, this isn't a debate stage. It's an interview. But Joy was locked in, cornered by her own pride, unable to retreat without feeling defeated. I'm just asking questions. Joy shouted. No, Halle said calmly. You're trying to provoke me. And then Halle leaned forward. Slowly, deliberately. The studio lights caught the sheen on her cheekbones, the intensity in her eyes. Joy, she whispered, do you want to know the truth? Joy froze. The entire room froze. The truth, Halle said, is that you don't actually want transparency. You want confession. You want someone to spill their pain just so you can analyze it on air. But people's lives are not your punchlines. Their trauma is not your ammunition. And their boundaries are not inconveniences. Joy's face went stiff, a stunned, silent hurt flickering across it before she masked it under irritation. Halle continued. You think empowerment means telling the world everything. It doesn't. Empowerment means surviving the things you don't talk about. And I survived plenty. The audience clapped, a soft wave that grew louder, steadier, until the producers couldn't stop them even if they tried. Joy looked around, her jaw clamped tight as she realized the room wasn't with her anymore. Halle slowly uncrossed her legs. And if my silence offends you, she said, That says more about you than it does about me. Another round of applause. Louder. Warmer. Joy stood abruptly from her seat as if the heat of the moment had become unbearable. Whoopi's head snapped toward her. Joy, sit down. But Joy didn't. I'm not going to sit here and be painted as the bad guy, Joy said, breath shaky but defiant. I asked a question. That's all. Halle stood too. The audience surged with shock, phones rising again, whispers sweeping like wind through dry leaves. Halle faced Joy directly. You didn't ask a question, Halle said softly. You made a judgment. Joy shook her head. I won't apologize for doing my job. I didn't ask you to apologize, Halle said. I asked you to listen. And that was the line that broke something open in the room. Because Joy suddenly had no comeback. No joke. No deflection. Just silence. Whoopi moved between them, her hands raised gently. All right, Whoopi murmured. We're taking a break. The producers immediately cut to commercial, the red lights above the cameras turning off in a blink. The second they did, the audience buzzed like a beehive cracked open. Halle stepped back. Her breathing was controlled, steady, but her eyes were still burning. Joy turned away, her face flushed with anger, embarrassment, confusion, a storm of emotion she didn't know how to hide. Sunny reached out toward Halle. Are you okay? Halle nodded slowly, though her voice trembled with the honesty of the moment. I'm fine. Just tired of pretending I'm not hurt when people try to tear me apart. Sawa placed a hand on her back, offering quiet solidarity. When cameras came back on, the tension had settled but not faded. They finished the interview, short, stiff, controlled. But the explosion had already happened, and the world was already watching. Within minutes of the segment airing, social media ignited. Clips spread across platforms, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, each one capturing a different flashpoint of the confrontation. #Team Halle trended instantly. So did #Joy Behar. So did #The View. Some viewers sided with Halle, praising her for standing up for herself, for drawing boundaries, for naming the disrespect publicly. Others defended Joy, insisting she was just doing her job or that celebrities should expect tough questions. But no one, absolutely no one, stayed silent. The conversation dominated headlines by the afternoon. By nighttime, major outlets were already breaking down the exchange frame by frame. Op-eds, reaction videos, fan theories, heated debates. Every corner of the internet had something to say. And through it all, Halle remained composed, issuing a short message hours later. I stand by my boundaries. I stand by my truth. And I stand by the belief that respect should never be optional. The story wasn't just a moment. It became a cultural flashpoint. A reminder that even legends can be pushed too far. And even talk shows can forget the line between conversation and confrontation. If you've watched this moment unfold with us, tell me what you think. Whose side are you on? What do you believe went too far, or not far enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every one of them. And don't forget to subscribe to Talk Narrative for more explosive, cinematic breakdowns of the most dramatic moments happening on air, behind the scenes, and everywhere in between.